Panagdait sa tanan, I'm Richie Benitas and I'm going to report Article 1199 to Article 1200. So, Article 1199 states that a person alternatively bound by different prescriptions shall completely perform one of them. The creditor cannot be compelled to receive part of one and part of the other undertaking. So, alternative obligation, it is where there are two or more obligations are given but only one is due. It means that though there are a lot of prestations were given, but the delivery of one object or prestation is already sufficient to extinguish the obligation. So for example, Anna obliged herself to give Lisa a ballpen number 1, ballpen number 2, and ballpen number 3. So in this case, pwede ra isa ang ihatag ni Anna kang Lisa. Kay it's because ang giingon man sa law kay kanang 1 is already sufficient to extinguish her obligation. Take note that the obligation of the obligor is to deliver one of those objects as she promised, because the creditor cannot be compelled to receive part of one and part of the other undertaking. So in this article, there are different kinds of obligation according to object. So first is simple obligation. Simple obligation is only have one prestation. Example ani kay Ben obliged himself to give Art a guitar. Wala siya. Example na siya sa obligation. Simple obligation. And then, compound obligation is there are two or more prestations. Like, Ben obliged himself to give Art a guitar or a piano. So compound obligation napud siya duha, which is conjunctive obligation. It is where there are several prestations and all of them are due. So kuan kanang daghan siya og prestations and then tanan sila ihatag nimo sa creditor, ihatag sa debtor sa creditor. And then ang next is distributive obligation. Distributive obligation is two or more prestations and due pud siya, tanan pud siya due, tanan pud siya ihatag nimo. And then, there is a distributive obligation, kaya na po siya duha, alternative o facultative obligation. So, ang alternative, katana kung giingon ganina nga, two or more obligation, but only one is due kay, one is already sufficient to extinguish the obligation of the debtor. So, ang facultative pod kay, there is only one prestations, pero pwede ma-substitute ni debtor ang katong iyang ihatag nga object sa creditor. So next is Article 1200. So states that, so next is Article 1200. So, states that the right of choice belongs to the debtor unless it has been expressly granted to the creditor. The debtor shall no right to choose those prestations which are impossible, unlawful, or which could not have been the object of the obligation. So, diri sa Article 1200 kay kuani siya kanang naay general rule ani. Ang general rule ani kay the right belongs to the debtor except na siya exemption. Ang exemption ani, exception di ay kay unless given to the creditor. So, for example, kanang for example, Anna obliged herself to give Liza a ballpen number 1 or ballpen number 2. Since ang ilahang contract kay silent man, silent, so wala gingon kung kinsang right ang mo choose. So kuan ba, pag-abot ba sa maturity date, pwede ba makademand si C kung unsa nga object ang i-deliver? Pwede ba makademand si Liza kung unsa ba nga object ang i-deliver ni Ana sa iyaha? Dili siya pwede makademand. Kay nga naman, kay ang ilahang kay ang obligation man kay silent. So, kung silent gani ang obligation, sa debtor gyud na mapadulong ang right to choose. So, si Ana ang naay right nga mo choose kung unsa nga object ang ihatag niya kang Liza. Kung ballpen number 1 ba or ballpen number 2. So, kanus adi ay pwede makapili si Liza. So, pwede siya makapili if, 'di ba? Kato siya, Anna obliged herself to give Liza a ballpen number 1 or ballpen number 2. And then hatagan og kwan si Liza or ballpen number 3 ang katong option ni Liza. So diri na siya pwede naa siya right nga maka-choose katong option niya, katong option C, which is ballpen number 3, kay pwede na to niya ma-demand nga mo to i-deliver sa iyahan ni Ana. So mo na siya ang sa diri right choose belong to the debtor. So diri pud sa ikaduha nga kuan nga paragraph kay kuan dili pwede mo kuan mo choose si debtor ani nila kay ngano void man ni ilahang prestations kay impossible, unlawful, or which could not have been the object of the obligation. For example, ani Anna obliged herself to deliver to Liza a can of opium or a can of Carabao milk, which ang Carabao milk kay gikan siya sa cow. So ang katong first option gyud dili gyud to siya pwede kay unlawful man to siya, unlawful man tong can of opium. And then ang katong ikaduha kay kuan pod siya kanang impossible, pero pwede ra siya ma-deliver ni debtor, pwede ra to siya ma-deliver ni Ana kay even though it is impossible pwede ra man to nimo siya makuha kay gikan man to siya sa cow milk. And then naapod kuan pod siya kanang naamang good pod diri nga pwede siya mahulog og simple simple obligation. So, kung inani na gani siya nga case, pwede siya mahulog og simple obligation. Kung kuan siya kanang kung ang debtor the debtor choice is communicated to the creditor, and ang ikaduha pod kay when the debtor is communicated his or her choice to the debtor if he or she will given a chance. So ang ikatulo ani kay where only one prestation due to practicable, and then kaning ikatulo nga kuan kanang ikatulo nga alternative obligation converted into a simple obligation kay madiscuss ni siya sa sunod nga reporter, which is Sheila Marie Chu, and this is belong to article 1202. So mora ni siya, and then thank you, and I hope hasabot mo sa kwang report.
Panagdaya sa tanan, I am Sheila Marie Chu, and I will going to present Article 1201. In Article 1201 says that the choice shall produce no effect except from the time it has been communicated. So, it simply says that the choice has no effect until both parties will be communicated, and the obligation will remain alternative. For example, I am the debtor, and I choose a car to deliver to the creditor without giving any notice or communicated with her. Then, the obligation will remain alternative. Once the notice has been already given to the creditor, then the obligation ceases alternative and became a simple obligation. For example, the car that I choose to deliver to the creditor. Then, the creditor already informed what prestation I will going to give. He already accept my notice. Then, to make it a simple obligation, I, the debtor, simply oblige myself to deliver the car to the creditor. As simple as that. Once gali nga both parties kay kabalo na kung unsa ang gisabutan or unsa ang napili nga prestation, then the obligation will become simple. When such choice was properly made and communicated by both parties is irrevocable. Dili na siya pwede mausab. So, sa example nga car na ang giingon ako nga prestation nga akong i-deliver ni creditor. Once nga galing nga na-agreed na nga car akong i-deliver niya, then pag abot sa time nga i-deliver na nako ang car niya, kay mukalit ra ko og ingon ni creditor nga dili na lang car akong ihatag nimo, house na lang akong ihatag nimo. Then it's depend upon the creditor kung mo-agreed siya nga ang house na lang akong i-deliver, dili na lang tong car nga gi-agreed namo. But in general rule nga once nga both parties nga na properly agreed na kung unsa ang gisabutan nga prestation, is dili na siya mausab. But depende kung unsa ang masabutan both creditor and the debtor. And also take note the proof and form of notice. The law does not require any particular form of giving a notice. Wala ga require ang law kung unsa nga klase nga notice ang ihatag, both sa creditor o sa debtor. Kung kisa manggali ang mo decide, pwede na siya itawag through call, text, or through writing, and orally. And that's all for Article 1201. So Article 1202. The debtor shall lose the right of choice when among the prestations whereby he is alternatively bound, only one is practicable. So, when the debtor loses his right of choice, the obligation becomes simple. When all of the prestations except one have become impossible or unlawful, the debtor loses his right of choice. This is because the obligation loses its alternative character. It becomes a simple obligation. For example, I am obliged to give Benitez a car, a house, and a star. Of course, I cannot choose the star because it is impossible. But there is a house and a car. But due to a fortuitous event, naglinog, nag-earthquake, and the house was already damaged by the earthquake. So, nawala na ang house. Dili na nako pwede mahatag kang Benitez ang house. So, ang car na lang ang nabilin. So, wala na ko'y right to choose kung unsa ang akong i-deliver kang Benitez. Kay ang car na lang mo ay nabilin. So, that is why the obligation has become a simple one. So, I am obliged to give only the car to Benitez. Car na lang akong mahatag niya kay mo na lang ang applicable. Mo na lang ang nabilin nga choice nako. Kay ang house naguba na tungod sa earthquake and ang star impossible na nga mahatag nako niya. Kay of course dili man magunitan ang star. But if later ang car na pod mo ay na-damage due to another fortuitous event. Example, nagbaha, then naanod ang car, naguba, nabanda-banda, naguba. So, damage and lost na ang car. So, wala na kay right kung as a debtor, wala na kay right kung unsang akong i-render para kang Benitez. So, the obligation is extinguished due to a fortuitous event, and I am not liable in any way. Kay na-damage siya and na-lose tungod man sa fortuitous event. So, dili ko liable sa damages sa car o sa house kay due man siya sa fortuitous event. So, nawad-an ako og right tungod sa fortuitous event. So, wala na ko'y mahatag kang Benitez. So, dili kay sa wala na ko'y nahatag niya, kanang liable na ko, kay wala ko nakahatag niya, liable ko sa katong mga prestations nga ang ihatag niya. Dili, kay na-damage man siya tungod sa fortuitous event. So, that's all for Article 1202.
So, panagdait sa tanan, I'm Rachel T. Katamko, and I report Articles 1203. So, Articles 1203. If the creditors asks the debtor cannot make a choice according to the terms of the obligation, the latter may rescind the contract with damage. So, meaning of the rescind is cancel or take away to refuse the order. Yes. So, example, Shopee, kanang nag-order ka, tapos pila kas adlaw, imong gi-cancel. So, mao to siya. So, when you say Articles 1203 is speak of alternatives obligation. Through the bad faith of the object, creditor, the debtor cannot make choice of his right to choose. The said of debtor cannot misresign the contract with damage. So when you say the debtor may resign the contract, is rescission create the obligations to return the things which were the object of the contract together. So, with the fruits and the price with its interest. It is a very nature of an alternative obligation. So, that the debtor cannot make his choice without the consent of the creditor. Hence, the right giving the debtor to rescind the contract and recover the damage. So, if through the creditor's fault, he cannot make choice according to the terms of the obligation. So, however, is not bound to rescind. So, when you say, example, so A is obligated to deliver to B either a brand new owner Jeep or slightly used a car or Corolla car. Since the B likes the car, but because of A has a right of choice, so B tries to make sure that he gets the Corolla car. So, while pretending to drive the Jeep, he purposely causes the seal to be pumped into the tank, knowing the bicycle is unleaded. So, as a result, the engine breaks down. I would have no more to choose but to deliver the only remaining objects of Corolla car or jeepney or owner Jeep or Jeep la. So, under the Articles 1203, A has the power of rescind the contract and the two acts as indemnifications for against to B. So that's all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Silami B. Balmadis from Group 2, the one who discussed the Article 1204. Article 1204. The creditor shall have a right to indemnity for damages when, through the fault of the debtor, all the things which are alternatively the object of the obligation have been lost, or the compliance of the obligation has become impossible. The indemnity shall be fixed, taking as a basis the value of the last thing which disappeared, or that of the service which last become impossible. Damages other than the value of the last thing or service may also be awarded. Effects of loss or becoming impossible of objects of obligation. Articles 1203 and 1204 apply when the right of choice belongs to the debtor. So under the Article 1205, the creditor has the right to choose. So first, some of the objects. If some of the objects of the obligation have been lost or have become impossible, even though the fault of the debtor, the latter is not liable since he has the right of choice and the obligation can still be performed. This is an exception to the general rule established in Article 1170 regarding liability for damages arising from negligence. All of the objects, if all of them have been lost or have become impossible through the debtor's fault, the creditor shall have a right to indemnity for damages, since the obligation can no longer be complied with. Of course, if the cause of the loss is a fortuitous event, the obligation is extinguished. The praise or the compliance of the obligation has become impossible refers to obligations to do. So, this is the effect of loss of object of obligation if some of the objects of an obligation have been lost or become impossible, even though fault of the debtor. So the latter is not liable since he has the right of choice and the obligation can still be performed. And if all of them have been lost or have become impossible through his fault, the creditor shall have the right to indemnity for the damages, since the obligation can no longer be complied with. So the basis of indemnity shall be fixed, taking as basis the value of the thing lost. So, for example, Marcelino obliged himself to deliver to Miliciano either his only piano or a guitar. Through the fault of Marcelino, the piano was lost, and subsequently, the guitar also disappeared. So, in this case, Marcelino could recover the damages from Melencio because the basis of recovery should be the amount of the lasting lost. So which was the piano. So So the basis of indemnity. The indemnity shall be fixed, taking as basis the value of the lasting which disappeared, referring to the obligations to give. So, or the service which last became impossible, referring to obligations to do. So, in this case of this agreement, it is incumbent upon the creditor to prove such value, or which thing last disappeared, or which service last become impossible. So other damages may also be awarded in Article 1204, Parts 2 and 3. So, ang basis of indemnity kay the creditor shall have a right to indemnity for damages when through the fault of the debtor, all the things which are alternatively the object of the obligation have been lost. So, if the compliance of the obligation has become impossible, the indemnity shall be fixed, taking as a basis the value of the lasting which disappeared, or that of the service which last become impossible. So, damages other than the value of the lasting. So, kini nga situation sa Article 1204, dili na manggod kayo ni siya nahitabo karon, kay kasagaran manggod karon is 5-6 na ang ginagamit sa mga tao. 5-6 na ang uso bito karon. So, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so panagdait sa Diyos ug sa tanang kabuhatan, I am Rinya Alsansan, and I am tasked to share my understanding about Article 1205. Okay, so ano nga ba ang sinasabi ng Article 1205? Article 1205 states that when the choice has been expressly given to the creditor, so if in the preceding article, the choice is given to the debtor, here in this article naman, the choice is given to the creditor, or punta naman tayo sa choice ng creditor. Okay, so when the choice has been expressly given to the creditor, the obligation shall cease to be alternative from the day when the selection has been communicated to the debtor. Okay, so baliktad lang. Of course naman, kapag ang may right of choice is nanggagaling from the debtor, ang mag-communicate niyan ay from the debtor to the creditor. However, in this article, yung may right of choice is si creditor naman. Okay, so malamang sa malamang manggagaling naman kay creditor ang communication papunta kay debtor. Okay, so this article states the right to choose belongs to the creditor but sets the rules followed. Okay, they determine the responsibilities of the debtor before the choice of the creditor is communicated to the former. Okay, so until then, before the creditor will communicate his or her choice, the responsibility of the debtor shall be governed by the following rules. Okay, so first, if it is lost through a fortuitous event, si creditor daw ay pwede siyang mag-choose, or creditor can choose among the items or object that was being left or katong mga nahibilin. Okay, so second, if the loss naman, or now if it is through the fault of the debtor naman, yung loss is through the fault of the debtor, si creditor who daw ay maaaring pumili sa mga natitirang object, plus pwede rin yung price ng item na nawala due to the fault of the debtor, of course with damages or plus damages. But what if tanan? Okay, so tanan yung the lost. All of the things are lost through the debtor's fault. Then in that case, si creditor daw has the right to choose the price of any one or even any object that is there, also with indemnity for damages. And if all naman is lost because of a fortuitous event due to earthquake, for example, then Article 1174 shall apply. So, kabalo na taan na, the obligation is extinguished. Let's say, for example, Mr. D is obliged to give Mr. C either object number 1, number 2, or number 3. Diba, our example is at Mr. C's option. Kasi, diba nga, it's creditor's right to choose. So, before Mr. C communicated his choice to Mr. D, let's say object number 1 is lost due to the debtor's fault, while object number 2 is lost naman due to fortuitous event, and the one that was remain is ang object number 3. Now, what are Mr. C's right, if any? So, the answer is that Mr. C can demand either first choice niya is object number 3 katong nahibilin kasi andyan pa nga naban, while his second option is to choose the price or the value of the object number 1, the one that was lost due to the debtor's fault or negligence. And in either case, either of the two, Mr. C has the right to claim damages. So, ngano kaha? It's because Mr. C has been deprived of the right to select. Diba, Mr. C's right to choose has been taken out by Mr. D, either yung number 1 ba or number 3 ang object. Okay, so question. Can Mr. C ask for the value of object number 2 katong nawala because of the fortuitous event, kay tungod bas gusto niya nga ang object number 2 kay mas dako ang value, mas mahal? Okay, so the answer would be no. Why? because it was lost because of the fortuitous event. Dili man sabsala ni debtor nga nawala to nga butang kay, let's say for example, tungod sa earthquake nawala, so dili man sab niya sala. So it's literally no. Okay, so the same rules shall be applied to obligations to do or not to do in case one, some, or all of the prestations should become impossible. Okay, so as you have observed, guys, our examples here is obligation to give, pero article states that it would also apply to the obligation to do. Okay, so another example, guys. For instance, Master D promises to deliver one of the following items to Master C. Okay, so we have first a specific phone, we have a specific laptop, and specific tablet. Okay, so again, the choice belongs to the creditor. So what if nawala atong first item due to fortuitous event? Actually, this has no difference if it is the choice of the creditor. Sa creditor is he has the choice sa mga nabilin, which is B and C, specific laptop and tablet. But in this case, this remains to be alternative kasi naapay mga option. Pero what if nawala ang dua, 1 and 2, specific phone and laptop, due to fortuitous event? Again, same with the rule that was stated recently, that if it's the choice of the debtor, diba? Kasi this time, it's the choice of the creditor. Same still with the rule ng choice ni debtor. This automatically becomes simple obligation kasi wala nang iba pang pwedeng maging choice. And isa pa, fortuitous event kasi yung naging pong reason kung nawala yung specific phone at saka yung specific laptop. Wala namang may gusto, hindi naman kasalanan ni debtor. Pero what if nawala lahat? Again, the obligation is extinguished. Okay, so pero what if, guys, if it is a loss through the debtor's fault? So dito na po magkakaroon ng difference. So what if letter A, specific phone was lost? Okay, so the choice of the creditor will remain to be alternative. However, the choice remains the same. Tulo ra gihapon, you can still choose the specific phone atong nawala due to the debtor's fault. Actually, you cannot demand yung mismong specific phone talaga, but the value of that object plus damages is. But if you choose those who haven't lost, for example, specific laptop and specific tablet, he cannot demand for damages kasi it wasn't lost. And the difference is that, di ba guys, kapag po choice ni debtor ay kung unsa tong nahibilin, yun na po yung choice niya. But it is not the same pag choice ni creditor kasi pwede niyo pa rin pong pilin yung katong mga nawala. Because nga, the reason why it was lost, it's because of the debtor's fault. So, pag pinili niya yung nawala, in addition to the value of the thing that was lost, the creditor, can demand for damages. So, yun yung pagkakaiba po this time. So, yun nga, nawala ang duha ka objects through debtor's fault and naiwan na lang si specific tablet. If you have remembered the rule here, if it's choice of the debtor, automatically maging simple na lang siya kasi iisa na lang yung pagpipilian. But in this case, still tulo ra gihapon ang choices na creditor. Ngano kasi pag siya yung pumipili, he can still choose those items which got lost, but then again, not the specific object that was demandable, but the value of the object. That is value of the thing plus damages na. Now, what if tanan nawala due to the debtor's fault? So, same ra gyapon, still the creditor has 3 choices, but this time nanay damages tanan.
Article 1206, Paragraph 1. When only one prestation has been agreed upon, but the obligor may render another in substitution, the obligation is called facultative. Paragraph 2. The loss or deterioration of the thing intended as a substitute through the negligence of the obligor does not render him liable. But once the substitution has been made, the obligor is liable for the loss of the substitution on the account of his delay, negligence, or fraud. Article 1206, paragraph 1 pertains to facultative obligation, where the obligor may render another thing as a substitution from the agreed prestation. For example, Zach promised that he will deliver a Canon scanner and printer to Mark because he cannot give him an HP printer and scanner. Paragraph 2, it is very clear that the substitute is the new object for the prestation, in which the creditor expect to obtain. And if the principal thing is lost or deteriorate before the substitution due to fortuitous event or due to the debtor's fault, the debtor's obligation to deliver the principal thing is not affected. But when the substitution happened and the principal thing is lost or deteriorate, the obligor may find liable and is obliged to pay for damages. But if it is due to fortuitous event, the obligation is extinguished. For example, from the given example earlier, if the Canon scanner and printer that Zach promised to deliver to Mark was lost before the substitution, then it does not affect his obligation to deliver the principal thing to Mark. But when the substitution has arise, then and the substitute thing is lost or have been deteriorate, then Zach is liable on his account for his delay or his negligence or his fraud. So that is Article 1206.
So hello everyone. So we will tackle about the Article 1207 and 1208, which it also tackles about the joint and solidary obligation. So there are two kinds of obligation: the individual or single obligation and the collective obligation, which the collective obligation has also two kinds, the joint and solidary obligation. So what is individual or single obligation? So sayo na siya, bali ang imo lang timan-an is nay usa ka debtor and napoy usa ka creditor. So ato lang. So ang collective obligation is there are two or more obligee and there are two or more obligor. So joint and solidary. So what is joint obligation? So na siya'y maxim, which is to each his own. So bali iya ang ilahang obligation, iya po ang ilang right. So ang sa mga debtors na sila iya nga obligation to fulfill, and sa mga creditors po na po sila iya nga right nga makuha. So unsa may kuan niya. So the debtor is liable only for a proportionate part of the debt. So katulad iya sila, and each the creditor is entitled only to a proportionate part of the creditor. So example, Aaron and Bay are joint debtors of Cat and Doe, who are a joint creditors to an amount of 20. So kani si Aaron and Bay na sila iya nga obligation. So si Aaron na siya obligation nga mo bayad to the creditors of 10 pesos, and Bay also has obligation to pay 10 pesos to an amount of 20 pesos. Kani pud si Cat and Doe na sila proportion part na makuha, which is kani si Cat na ay 10 pesos nga proportion part, and Doe also has a 10 pesos proportion part. So the question is, how much can Cat demand from the debtors? So pila ang makuha ni Cat sa debtors? So kay kani si Cat man, ang iyalang proportion is 10 pesos. So ang makuha niya sa duha ka debtor, so sa 10 lang, i-divide na nimo siya sa duha ka debtor, which is si Aaron and Bay. So tag 5 sila. 5 each of the debtors. So mo yang makuha. So the second question is, how much can Cat demand from Aaron? So pila di ang makuha ni Cat kang Aaron, no? So kay pareha man sila nga si Cat yang proportion part na makollect is 10 pesos, and Aaron also has a proportion part nga 10 pesos to pay. So all in all, na siya'y 10 pesos nga makuha from Aaron. So ato lang, no? Then what is solidary obligation? So it has a maxim of all for one, one for all. So unsa man na siya? Bali, the debtor is liable for the whole obligation, and each creditor is entitled to demand payment of the whole obligation. So ang debtor na siya'y big responsibility sa creditor, kay ang pwede man gud si creditor mo demand siya og demand for fulfillment of the whole obligation, pwede sa duha ka debtor, pwede pud sa usa lang ka debtor. So mo nang mo increase jud ang ilahang responsibility for the creditor, and the creditor mo increase ang ilang right. So an example of this is Aaron and Bay are solidary debtors of Cat and Doe, who are solidary creditors to an amount of 20 pesos. So kani ang question is, how much can Cat demand from the debtors? So pila di ang makuha ni Cat sa duha ka buok debtors? So of course kay si Cat, pwede man siya mo demand sa whole, no? Pwede siya mo demand sa whole nga sa whole obligation. So bali kani si Aaron and Bay, bali mag 10 pesos ra gihapon sila. So all in all, si Cat makakuha siya og 20 pesos from the two debtor. So the second one, how much can Cat demand from Aaron? So pwede day na nga si Cat mo demand siya kang Aaron lang. So pwede, kay mo man ay rules sa solidary obligation nga ang usa ka debtor is pwede siya, or ang usa ka creditor or ang creditors pwede sila mo demand sa usa lang ka debtor. So which is si Cat ni demand kang Aaron. So unsa may mahitabuan na? Bale, si Aaron mo pay jud siya yung baryan ang whole obligation, which is 20 pesos. So what about Bay? So si Bay nagyapon siya obligation, kay si Aaron magpa-reimburse man na siya ang magpa-reimburse man sa siya ang nabaryan. So si Bay nagyapon siya baryan kang Aaron, which is 10 pesos. So what about Doe? So si Doe nagyapon siya makuha, maskin pag si Cat ra mo ni demand, kay bali maskin pa og solidary kuan man kanang bali na mangyapon sila contract, mangyapon nila nga sila ila nga proportion, pero si Cat lang mo ni demand. Pero pwede pod nga ang duha ka creditor mo demand silang duha sa usa ka debtor. So yes, so naay mga phrases or words nga gina-use to indicate for joint obligation or solidary obligation. So for joint obligation, mag-ayos sila og mancom, mancomunadamente, prorata, proportionately, jointly, conjoint. So for solidary obligation, ang ginayos sila severally, jointly and severally, solidaria, in solidum, solidarily, together, and separately. So Article 1207. So darita sa pinakauna nga sentence na the concurrence of two or more creditors or of two or more debtors in one and the same obligation does not imply that each of the former has a right to demand or that each of the latter is bound to render entire compliance with the prestation. So nagtackle lang siya about ani sa kwano sa joint obligation. So dari diba ang atong example tang nagi is iya sila og bayad, iya sila og right and parts sa obligation. So dari giingon lang is ang creditor daw dili daw siya daw pwede nga dili daw pwede daw ang creditor nga mo demand og fulfillment for the whole obligation sa debtor lang sa usa ka debtor o sa debtors. And also the debtor as well dili po sila pwede nga mo render or mo bayad sa entire obligation. Kay kung mahitabo man gud na ang mahimo na siyang solidary liability, dili na siya joint liability. So kani the second sentence, there is solidary liability only when the obligation expressly so states or when the law or the nature of the obligation requires solidarity. So, natay katong exemptions no, which is ang katong common nga exemptions, which is the SLN or the stipulation, the law, and the nature of the obligation. So, ang kaning stipulation or the obligation expressly so states. So, kung ang mean lang anin niya is kung ang obligation ay gaingon. Press ato atong mga example nga. For example, si cat and dog is are solidary obligor or solidary debtors and cat and dog are solidary creditors. So muna siya ang stipulation. So ang obligation na mo'y nag-ingon. While kani ikaduha is the law expressly so states. So if ang law na mo'y mag-ingon, no? For example, usa ka example is kana bitang Baylis incommodatum. So, pwede na ito niya ma-experience kayo bitang magpahulam ta. So, for example, ako, nagpahulam ko sa akong book, sa akong duha ka book amiga. So, kato sila, kaya ako masilang ipahulman na sila'y obligation nga ituk ay kanabitang ampingan ang ako ang book. But then, pag uli nila, gisi-gisi na akong book, nanay mga nangawala. So, kato akong duha ka friend, automatically, the law expressly so states nga silang duha na sila'y solidary obligation sa ako kay diba sa ako nagpahulam ko silang duha, so silang duha dapat may mo amping so dili na ako kailangan identify pa na ako kung kinsa may una nakagisi, kinsa jud may salan kay sila man duha akong gipahulman, so silang duha may na obligation, so dili sila ingon nga kanya-kanya. So kani the last one is the nature of the obligation. So dani Article 1208. If from the law or the nature or the wording of the obligation to which the preceding article refers, the contrary does not appear, the credit or debt shall be presumed to be divided into as many equal shares as there are creditors or debtors, the credits or debts being considered distinct from one another. So, kani siya, ang Article 1208 is baliga support ra siya sa Article 1207, which nag-provide siya presumptions about sa joint obligation. So, kani, if sa obligation daw is naay duha ka debtors and naapoy duha ka creditors, so it is presumed that the obligation is joint. And also, if sa obligation bitaw nga wala bitaw naka-state dadto nga joint ba or kana bitang wala bitaw naka-state dadto nga joint or solidary, like for sa mga example nato nga nadyo mga, for example, cat and dog are solidary or joint debtors, mga inana nga nakabutang jud siya sa obligations. So if inana gali wala gay naka-states, so gipresumed na siya nga joint jud ang obligation if wala naka-states. For example, para sa nang cat and dog are bound to pay Aaron and Bay. So kana wala man siya naka kanang naka-states kung kung solidary ba or joint. So gipresume na nga kato nga obligation is joint obligation. So kato siya. And then kato siya no kuan na siya nga joint obligation. Kaning sa subject to the rules of court governing the multiplicity of the suits. So if gali no ang creditor kay mag-file siya og action against the debtor, so kay kanya-kanya good ni. So if mag-file na kagaso, di mo sila kanya-kanya. So if ang creditor gali kay mag-file sa usa gali ka debtor, might as well nga sila lang tanan kay ang ingon ko do subject to the rules of multiplicity of the suits. So kuan siya kanang bali might as well na lang jud daw nga mag-file na lagaso sa tanan para bitaw dili bitaw madaghan ang kaso, dili ka nang murag magbalik-balik ang kaso sa usa lang bitaw ka kontrata, ana sa usa lang bitaw ka cause. So mo na siya giingon sa Article 1208. Nasabtan ninyo. Thank you for listening. What happened? Huy.